Hello, everybody, and welcome to another episode of In Conversation Live. Thank you so much for joining us, and thank you particularly Heather Hancock, LVO, Lieutenant of the Royal Victorian Order, who is the first female master of St John's College, Cambridge. I can tell, so that she's sitting in her Master's Lodge there, smiling at us. Hello, Heather. You must be very proud to be Master of St John's, the first female master for more than 500 years. And you were, I think, one of the earliest female medical students, not medical students, students in land studies back in the very early 1980s, when women were first starting to be allowed to study at St John's. So let's go back to your undergraduate days, because you're in the location now where you were back in 1982, was it, or 83?
1984, I arrived as an undergrad.
84. The first female students were admitted there in 1981, I think, weren't they?
These were postgrads, and our first female undergrads arrived in 82. So right. I was the third year of women coming into the college.
Right. So tell us about that then. How was it for you then as a medical student?
Brilliant. It was fantastic. Yeah. I think there were about 60 women in my year out of 170 undergraduates.
Yeah.
And it was the most wonderful experience. And I talked to my friends who were here in my year and a kind of 2 years beforehand, and we've just had the 40th anniversary of Women in College. What I hear almost always is just how fabulous it was to walk in and think, now we're so welcome, and how do we kind of seize all the opportunity that's been provided and make the most of it. So it was very energizing, and it's just such a lovely college, and so welcoming. It was then and it is now. In many ways it's sort of still the same, that experience that you have as arriving as an undergraduate today as I remember, and you know, people who are members of college 20 years ahead of me remember, and I'm sure you remember, Roger.
I had a fantastic time there back in, well, I'm a bit older than you, so I was there as 68 to 71, and I absolutely loved it. But Heather, how many female students do you have now compared with men in the college?
No, it's about 50-50 at undergraduate level. In fact, our offers, we've just issued our offers for the next admissions round in October this year, and the women have slightly edged on the offers. But of course, you know, who actually turns up after the offers have been made is a bit of an inexact science. At postgrad level, we have a bit more challenge. More men go forward into postgraduate education than women. So we've still got a bit of distance to make, like any other institution at postgrad level.
Right, equality in being an important issue. And how many medical students have you got in John's now?
It's one of our strongest cohorts, and of course we've got medics for 6 years. So we take about 15 to 18 a year, I think, roughly that. And we have a medical fellowship of 10 medics and 1 vet who counts amongst that. So we really are very strong in medical science in the college.
And one of the things we've been doing at the Royal Society of Medicine is helping school students to get into medical schools. I think they take about 7,800 students and about 28,000 apply. So it's pretty competitive. And we've, in our experience, there's a bit of a difference between the children from the public schools who seem to have a lot more, tutoring, confidence, whatever, compared with the kids from, for example, from the Mulberry School in East London. We had them down, and I could see that if you're trying to select medical students, or your faculty are trying to select medical students, how do you get over these kind of issues of the difference between the economic standing, etc., etc.?
Well, I think one of the interesting things is that if you look at the percentage of state school pupils who are securing 2 A-stars and an A at A level, which is sort of the average entry level for a Cambridge degree, it's 3 A-stars in the sciences, so for medicine. But it will be the same shift there. Then 75% of those students in any year who are achieving 2 A-stars and an A are in state schools. So the suggestion that somehow there isn't a pool to choose from is a bit misleading. Our
Right.
families are brilliant at making great selections, understanding who's got the aptitude and the commitment for the Cambridge course. It's got its own particular sort of demands and expectations. Obviously, it's very intense in periods, but they're also really super at understanding the school background of somebody, so that when they understand what their performance is, we tend not to reduce grades to allow somebody to come in, but we put the effort into finding the schools who've got the candidates who we hope they'll push our way.
And do you have some scholarships for the kids? Not cheap, is it, to live in Cambridge? Expensive town to live in. So you have some scholarships to help the kids who need the extra money?
Actually, Cambridge, compared to most universities, is not that expensive to live in. That's notwithstanding the fact that students have to take on debt to do it. But there are more expensive places to live. However, yes, we do a lot of bursarial support. And in fact, we've got a big campaign at the moment in the college. We want to be the first place in the UK that can offer entirely free places to UK students from really low income backgrounds, where the thought of entering into the scale of debt you need to take on for an undergraduate degree or an undergrad and postgrad degree combined, as would be medicine, is just so daunting. You can't even think of how you can do that. If the debt's more than what your entire family live on, it's just an entire barrier. So we're pioneering a move to raise an endowed fund to make places at the college entirely free for the very lowest income students.
That sounds absolutely great. Well, let's go back. Welcome any questions. Please do send them in from anybody who's tuned in. But let's go back to you then, because in the late 1880s, you ended up working for the government for some extent, or as an advisor with at the very end of Maggie Thatcher's reign, working with Ken Clarke and Kenneth Baker, I noticed. So tell us a little bit about that.
Yeah, well, Roger, you did say the 1880s, and I'm not quite that, so it wasn't.
Sorry.
It was the early 1990s, 1990s. And that came about because when I left Cambridge, I joined the Government Economic Service and was a government economist, and was posted to the Home Office, where I was shocked to find on arrival that I was their first and only economist. So that was a bit of a case of the blind leading the blind about what an economist did in the Home Office. But the upside was that I got a lot of exposure to ministers early in my career, and that led me to become private secretary to the Home Secretary after a couple of years. And I joined the Home Secretary's office 6 weeks before Margaret Thatcher left her position as Prime Minister, which was fascinating. In those days, your job as private secretary, of course, it's a civil service role, it's not a political role, but your job is to record and monitor and keep notes on everything. So if the phone rings, you put it through to the Home Secretary and you listen. You click the little button on the phone and you listen to the phone call, and you note the phone call until it's clear that it's political, in which case you put it down. And I remember that day that Margaret Thatcher resigned and David Waddington, who was the Home Secretary, came back to the office, and the phones just sort of setting on fire, really, and constantly answering and putting it through, clicking the button, and then discovering it's yet another political conversation about now what's going to happen. And it was an absolute eye-opener for somebody who just arrived in this sort of up close relationship with senior politicians to watch all that go on.
I can imagine the tearful departure of Mrs. Thatcher from 10 Downing Street. Everybody remembers that. Oh my goodness, that was an interesting time. But then you were involved in setting up the Department of National Heritage, which I think now has a different name, doesn't it?
It does. It's now Culture, Media and Sport. Yes, I was. So after the 1992 election, when as a civil servant, you want to be there to change your government, regardless of your politics. Those are the exciting moments. So I'd worked for 3 Home Secretaries. It's an intensely challenging role. And at the time, we were still dealing with things like a live IRA bombing campaign on the mainland. So it was a 24/7 commitment, really, very, very difficult, fascinating and interesting portfolio. In those days, the Home Office was the same as the Home Office and Ministry of Justice today. So big, big department. But after the 92 election, when there wasn't a change of government, I thought, oh, well, that's a bit going to be the same old. And I spotted that this new department was being created, and I'm just a relentlessly nosy and curious person. So I sort of blagged my way into the new permanent secretary's office and persuaded him that what he really needed was me to help him set up the department. And anyway, miraculously, he said yes. So I got that sort of rare experience in the civil service of how you start a government department from scratch, which is a fabulous experience, but also opened up for me a world that, it never really occurred to me that people had such fascinating jobs running museums and galleries, and an insight into the world of broadcasting and all these sorts of things. It was a real eye-opener.
Because you did land management at Cambridge, so you weren't really, you didn't do PPE at Oxford. So how did you kind of make that transition from, and why did you choose land management to study in the first place?
Yeah, well, I read land economy because I'm absolutely passionate about the environment and the countryside and the people who work it, and about food and agriculture. So that was my big driver. And I always thought I wanted to work as a land agent. And land economy at Cambridge is also a professional qualification. So it is a fast track into that world. Anyway, it turns out I didn't want to work in that area because it was a bit dead men's shoes at the time. I did it for a year and it was a bit not quite what I was hoping. So I made this change of direction. But I would tell you that most great sort of strategy people I've worked with over my career will have had a similar kind of multidisciplinary degree background, and actually quite a lot of them are land economists. So it gives you, you're doing law, economics, you're doing a degree level maths. It's a great synthesis. You're doing public policy. You're actually learning how to pull all these different areas of study or of research together and make a cohesive whole from them. So it does lend you to things like strategy and public policy. And I guess also I've always had a deep interest in governance, and I think there's a connection there as well.
I think you told me that governance and strategy, and actually, in medicine we could do with a bit more of that. I think one of the problems in medicine is we get so sort of bogged down in a little silo of, I'm a prostate surgeon, and you focus so much on one area and you don't look outside. But you've had this incredibly broad approach to things, which is probably why you've ended up as, because you're not really a university academic, are you? Most of the other masters of the colleges probably are they?
I came perilously close when I didn't like that first career step in land. I was on the verge of coming back to do my PhD, and I thought if I came back to Cambridge I would never ever leave, and I thought I must go and try something else before I make this permanent commitment. And that's why I became a government economist. So, there but for the grace of God. But perhaps I wouldn't have been Master of St. John's if I'd carried on in academia.
Maybe not. But so apart from the Department of National Heritage, the Millennium Commission, you were involved in that, weren't you? Tell us a bit about that. That was an interesting
so I set that up. That was funded by the National Lottery, and needed to be got up and running really quickly. And they were casting around for somebody to do it, and so I sort of stuck my hand up and said, well, I'll go and set it up. And I was considered terribly young at the time. There's that stage in your career when everyone thinks it's great that you're young, and then suddenly they worry that you're young. And I was on that kind of moment of, oh, you're terribly young. But anyway, nobody else was going to go and do it. So I went and got the the commission up and running. It was a lottery distributor, did some grand projets. They're things like the Millennium Stadium in Wales. It did lots and lots of funding of community projects and environmental projects up and down the UK. I ran it for a while. Actually, an interesting story. Michael Heseltine, who I've got great admiration for his leadership in all kinds of regeneration activities. But he was a commissioner. He was one of the politicians who was a commissioner on the board of the Millennium Commission. To our very first meeting, he announced, the last thing we need is a civil servant running this. And I sat there and sort of shrank and thought, this is a bit much. Anyway, a year and a bit later, they're going, oh, no, you do need to run this. You need to run this. However, I didn't quite see eye to eye with the Prime Minister at the time about the wisdom of the Millennium Dome or of the need for lottery money to go to the Royal Opera House from the Millennium Commission. So in the wonderful way that these things work, then I wasn't running the Millennium Commission anymore to do something else.
What did you do after that? What was your next move?
Well, we actually went home. We went home to North Yorkshire. We were about to start a family, and we went home, and I ran the Yorkshire Dales National Park.
Right, that's a.
So there's lots of upside for me.
So how?
I didn't have my fingers dirty with the Millennium Dome.
I'm not sure how much of a success that was in the end. Any thoughts about? It's a bit of a weird building, isn't it?
I'd say two things about it. Really big regeneration projects, which sort of accelerate by 1 or 2 generations the sort of the life chances and the economic opportunity in difficult areas like that. They're always bruising and expensive and difficult. So as a regeneration project, it's possibly worked. As a concept, it was a bad idea. I remember going and talking to Disney and saying, would you do this? And they went, nah, no, that's not what the public want anymore. And you think, well, if a commercial entity doesn't think it's what the public wants, then it's not what the public wants. And why would the public sector be any good at doing it? Why would, I mean, there's an element of hubris in it. So to me, it just wasn't a necessary step. And there were better ways to use lottery money.
Whose idea was it then in the first place?
It had been floating around for ages, the wish to do, to recreate the Grand Exhibition of 1851. There was another attempt to do it around, I think, to do with the sort of the festival of Brexit or something like that. But these things, I think their moment has passed, really, that the way that you connect with the public, you provide that sort of entertainment and education is very different these days. And it's a very sophisticated way of doing it. And it needs a level of flair and agility and not committee decision making. Yeah.
Well, you mentioned Michael Heseltine. I actually bumped into him in Liverpool, sitting in the hotel, because they've got a big conference centre on the waterfront there, which we go to from time to time. But I mean, that's been a big success, hasn't it? The Liverpool regeneration on the docks.
That's why I admire Heseltine, because he did things and understood you. Stick with them and stick with them and stick with them and stick with them. There's a patient game, making sort of effectively changing the economic infrastructure is a long-term game, and you've got to have all your ducks in a row, and you've got to pool the funding, and you've got to have great leadership. And that there are no wizard sort of wheezers that are shortcuts for it. The same with the Olympics. The Olympics advanced the sort of life chances of people in that part of London by 2 generations of improvement in their quality of life, in their health prospect, overcoming health inequalities, in their employment prospects. But that job is still not done.
Yeah. Well, we'll come back to the Yorkshire Dales. We were talking about that, but there's a question from Richard Christopher Worth. Thank you, Richard. The retained EU law bills going through Parliament at the moment, it seems rather worrying in terms of the environment. Do you think we should be worried about that?
Yes, I think we should. I think we should from an environmental point of view. I think we should from the point of view of sort of parliamentary democracy and scrutiny of this. I know much more about it from my days in the Food Standards Agency and taking the FSA through the consequences of Brexit. And the FSA is also facing this sort of bonfire of regulation, and there is no wish to have it. There's almost somehow a suggestion that business doesn't want regulation. It's some kind of constraint on trade. These regulations are there because they protect people, they protect places, they protect our health, the environment, biodiversity, and they also enable trade. We trade off the fact that we're a highly trusted country in terms of our goods and products and services. And I find it just utterly incomprehensible, this suggestion that there's some great clamour for all these regulations just to have a sunset clause, and then we'll start from nothing again. And that this is being done out with public scrutiny.
Sure. Well, we better not get too deeply bogged down in Brexit and the pros and cons. And I do want to come on to your important work at the FSA as a result of Brexit. But let's talk about Yorkshire a bit, because I was up there for Mike
always
Rawlins.
Talk about Yorkshire, always.
So it's God's own county. My dad came from Whitby, so I love Yorkshire. I have brilliant memories of holidays there when I was a kid. But so you went back there, but you've been involved really involved in the regeneration of the Yorkshire towns like Halifax, and so talk us through that, because it is a fantastic county, but it fell under a sort of shadow for some years. So give us your experiences and thoughts.
When we moved back home to Yorkshire, and I must confess, I am actually a Lancastrian. I'm just doing long-term missionary work over the border.
Okay.
But I've
You're
got
the red rose rather than the white rose. But St John's
two sons who are Yorkshiremen now, so I've probably got.
St John's has got a red rose on its gate, I noticed as well. Yeah. Anyway, carry on. So sorry, I interrupted.
So I went back to run the national park, which was an amazing experience, and then went to a regional development agency, Yorkshire Forward, which was in the heady days of joined up thinking about regional government and regional public sector investment. And I mean, I did one of those foolish things at the interview of making some sort of bold suggestion, and then you get the job. So my bold suggestion at the interview, they said, what's going to be different if you come? And I said, well, you know, with all these forlorn town and city centres, they're just sort of hemorrhaging investment. They don't work. People don't like them. They don't want to go to them. They are a bit miserable. What we need to do is no good blaming local authorities for this. They don't have the skills and they don't have the resources. And this is a result of, 20 or 30 years of decline. It's not attached to any particular political party. So what we need to do, and with the RDA, you had the power to do this. We need to go and find the best skills in the world in terms of master planning and landscape design and how you work with communities. And we need to work with these communities and their political and business leaders and ask them what the purpose of their town is, their town or city is. Because what was really happening was the sort of the ripping of the sort of industrial heart out of so many of these places had left them utterly bereft of purpose. And so you need to go and have a conversation with a local community about what is their purpose now. We can't recreate the purpose that's gone. How are they going to reform and sort of feel that there's some idea that's going to galvanize action? And that's really what we did. So we brought people in from all around the world. It was called the Urban Renaissance Programme, and then it spawned many imitators in the UK and abroad. We actually won a prize at the Venice Biennale for it as a really innovative approach. But I think one of the standout ones is Barnsley. There's a famous architect called Will Alsop, and people were thinking, how can you bring Will Alsop to work with the people of Barnsley? And it was brilliant. All kinds of people engaged for a long, long time in this discussion, thinking that they lived in a mining town. And for a while, it had been a mining town, but it wasn't anymore. And it was never going to be a mining town again. And all the kind of investment that had gone in from the public sector was just to build sort of sheds and warehouses and call centres on dual carriageways outside Barnsley. What about the heart of this place? How are we going to kind of get it beating again? So actually the work in Barnsley got everybody to recognise it was a market town. That's where it is, where it is. That's what it always was. That's what it always could be again. And if you go to Barnsley today, it's revitalised its market. We enabled quite a lot of compulsory purchase of land to reshape the town centre and to kind of give it the level of livability and investability, make it just attractive, a place that people would want to live and want to work and want to invest and visit in the future. So that's what the whole programme was about. It's 20 years old now.
Right. There's some gorgeous buildings in places like Barnsley and up in the Yorkshire Dales, but I guess that in the 60s they knocked a lot down and they built roads right through the centre, and there was an awful lot of redevelopment, which was rather horrible.
There still are some of those amazing buildings in places like Halifax and Wakefield and Huddersfield. The Victorian city fathers were amazing in terms of their ambition for the kinds of architecture that they thought their towns should have, and you can repurpose that today very effectively.
And so the purpose is going to be tourism, farming, or local industries.
So it all depended on that settlement. All depended on their geography, their characteristics, what the people were and wanted, and then how do you create create the facilities, the environment, the infrastructure for that to happen.
Yeah. So let's talk a little bit about the Football League, because you don't look like a footballer yourself, but you got involved in the English Football League and the reconfiguration of that. And of course, now probably the Premier League is the most successful league in the world, Football League, or Soccer League, the Americans like to call it. Talk us a bit about that and how you got involved in that.
Yeah, I've done quite a lot of stuff in sport, and I'm never going to be anyone's first pick for a team, so it is a bit surprising. But really, most of sports administration is about good governance and understanding money. The Football League, this was 25 years ago, when the Premier League was just getting going, were conscious of a pot of TV money and how are they going to make the most use of it, and also about the perilous state of many clubs in the league. And so they needed somebody who probably wasn't very interested in football to have some frank and honest conversations with them about actually what were the opportunities and what were the challenges and how were they going to collectively address them. It was a great experience. 72 football club chairmen, I tell you, every single one of them said to me, what you need to know, love, is football's a business. And 70 of them, I wanted to think, well, not the way you're running it. But so I did that in football. And then I mean, obviously later in my career, I went on to be very involved in the Olympic movement when I was at Deloitte, which was fabulous. And I was also the deputy chair of the World Athletics Championship. So I've always been really interested in sport, in its power to transform lives, and it's just being a good thing and it being great fun. And also it's always an interesting kind of governance and delivery challenge.
Yeah. Somebody was pointing out to me that the reason that there's so much money coming into sport now, not just football, but maybe especially football, is that because people watch sport live, and so the advertisers can feature prominently there, whilst almost everything else you watch, you think, well, I'll just watch it on catch up rather than live, so I can avoid the advertisements. But sport is in the here and now, and once it's over, people can't be bothered to watch it. So I guess that's an important factor in it, and certainly, you know, the success of the Premier League and the you know, all the leagues and football in the UK is something that you can be proud of. And then you got involved in the Prince's Trust, didn't you? That's why you're a lieutenant of the Royal Victorian Order. I like saying those words. Tell us a bit about the Prince's Trust. And he's no longer a prince, he's now the king.
Yeah, I got involved in that. So this is going back to my sort of long-standing commitment to the countryside. The Prince of Wales, when back in the 1999-ish, 97, 98, 99, very bothered about the countryside sort of fading away. And he wanted a kind of a big rural revival initiative. And as a bit of a side of desk activity, I went and led that for him. And out of that, became a trustee of the Prince's Trust with a particular kind of commitment to champion the needs of young people in the countryside. The Prince's Trust, which is an amazing charity, does so much good. And of course, everyone will know about it. It is at such scale, and it really does transform lives and get young people back on track and get them economically active and get them back into education, help their families. It's fabulous. But it wasn't really doing much in rural areas. So I went to the Prince's Trust to particularly focus on that as a trustee. And I was there, I was a trustee for I think 12 or 13 years, so probably too long. But it was in a period of great growth for the trust. And it's it now really is, I think, an international flagship for how you help young people who've just gone a bit off kilter. Get back.
Just give us some examples of the sort of things that you do, because I mean, it's easy to say that you want to revitalize the country and restore, you know, young people's hope, but how do you actually do that?
So what you do is it's as simple as who's there if they've been sent to prison when they come out of prison, to stop them being met at the gate by the drug dealer or the sort of fellow criminal and immediately distracted back into a life of crime and misdemeanor. It's getting them back into in a way of training that suits them. If you're not sort of if you've got all kinds of learning challenges and school's not working for you and you zone out from it, how do you get back on track? So the Prince's Trust does great get-in through programs. They're sort of almost like apprenticeship taster programs, just getting young people used to the rhythm and rigor of making a commitment to something, of being there every day, of being properly dressed, of how to take some instruction, how to ask for help, how to develop some skills, how to work with others. Because if you've been through, if your schooling's been disrupted, if you've been excluded, if you've had ill health, if you've had family trauma and something's gone wrong and you've started to get out of sync with the expectations, and it's very hard to get back on track. And what I really learned about the Prince's Trust, they still do great awards ceremonies, local, regional, national award ceremonies, and you'd always meet that young person's family there, almost always without exception, because they really wanted to help them as well, but they didn't know how. So it's very often, it's about mentoring, it's about some coaching, it's about some exposure to learning, it's about getting us a glimpse into what regular employment might look like, and then showing them a pathway to make that a sort of a permanent move.
You've had a pretty varied life, haven't you? So lucky, I think.
Curious, that's it.
Yeah, and I guess you could probably describe yourself as being up for it. You've grabbed every opportunity with two hands. So thank you so much, Heather. We will be making.
Thank you so much for being interested enough to talk to me about it. It's very flattering. I don't often do this. So
well, we'll make a recording of it and we'll pass it by you before we put it online. So thank you everybody for tuning in. Thank you, Heather, from St. John's College, Cambridge. What a wonderful place. And I'm really proud to be able to talk to you. It's been such fun. Bye for now.
Bye.